I am Dr. Kumar Bhardwaj, and today we are going to discuss a topic that is centralized processing and centralized cataloging. So, these two concepts we will discuss in detail in today's sessions. So, what we will cover in this session, that you need to understand, that we will cover what is centralized processing, its advantages and limitation, and what is centralized cataloging, its advantages and various other facets. We will also cover the limitation of centralized cataloging, what are the different types of centralized cataloging exist, and we will also ponder upon what is difference between centralized and distributed and cooperative cataloging. We will also cover various services which we can impart using the centralized cataloging, and what are the different international initiatives exist related around centralized cataloging, what are the different challenges library have been facing in to be part of the centralized cataloging process, and what is the future of the centralized cataloging. So, that is what we will discuss in these sessions. So, before we move and discuss what is centralized cataloging and what is centralized processing, you need to understand that these are a part of the library corporations. So, different type of libraries have several things common. Therefore, to provide better services to its clienteles through the corporation, several inhibit can be resolved, because library face lot of inhibits in providing services to the clientele. For instance, the budget crunch, the resources. So, lots of, and apart from improving the quality of the services with the limited staff is also one of the challenges a library face. Thus, when two or more libraries share their resources and services and agree to cooperate with each other, this is called the library corporations. The area of library cooperation can be varies actually in different settings. So, that also you need to understand, because it varies settings to different settings. So, if we actually the library has to mutually agree upon on which area they would like to cooperate with each other. So, apart from that, centralized processing in library, that what is this concept? So, high degree of uniformity in the participating libraries is the main requisites for centralized cataloging, and because we try to benefit maximum and so that the participating library can reap benefit out of it, and therefore, when uniformity is complete and all the individual preferences of the librarians and their institutions are foregone. Apart from that, economic and other reasons have compelled the librarians to look beyond their own institutions for help in bibliographic control of collections. Apart from that, the libraries have recognized the duplicated effort each library does in its own cataloging, and therefore, to avoid this duplication of efforts and to overcome the challenges because of the shortage of funds and manpower shortage, we try to come upon with the solution, why not to do the central processing of various operations which are common, and therefore, this concept has emerged. If you look into the definitions of the centralized processing, Weiner says that the term centralized processing may be broadly defined as any consolidated efforts to bring under one control the technical operations necessary to prepare library material for access and use at different services point. So, centralized processing can be of varied type. For instance, catalog and classifying the document at central place. Then we can have a centrally acquisition, catalog and classification of the document. And the third category, we can have acquisition, classification, cataloging and other technical operations and technical processing work. So, we can divide this centralized processing in various categories. So, and we can imagine like in right now in ICT, in current scenario in ICT environment, we can also think about different perspective. For instance, the preparing the book also. So, we can also think about making all the technical processing work that can also be shared through the centralized processing. So, that is the thing that you need to understand. So, before we move further and understand what is centralized cataloging, you need to understand this meticulously, that what are the different advantages of centralized processing. So, there can be varied advantages. For instance, lots the libraries which are participating in this centralized processing have lots of common things. They actually do lot of duplication works. So, to avoid the duplication of the work in the libraries, that is one of the advantages of opting the centralized processing. Apart from that, when you will do the processing at a central place, obviously the economy can be achieved. We can complete the task with a minimum amount. So, not just the minimum amount, actually this kind of centralized processing also actually encourage uniformity in the different libraries. So, uniformity is also very important, and that is also one of the factor. Actually, when you are participating in the centralized processing, you also adhere to the uniformity. So, that is but there are some limitation in that regard also, that there are some local variations that also we have to keep in mind. Apart from that, if you talk about the advantages of centralized processing, enhancing the quality of services is also possible when we actually participate in centralized processing, because when you are doing things at a central place, you will actually can do the in-house operation with a short very less number of staff. And when you have a spare staff to provide the services, of course, the quality of your services will be improve actually. So, that is another advantage, is that you can enhance the quality of the services in your library if you are participating in the centralized processing. Apart from that, there are some equipments which you require in providing the better services. They are very expensive, they are very sophisticated, and some library cannot afford those sophisticated equipments. But if you are participating in a centralized processing, that become actually affordable, and ultimately it help us in improving the quality of the services in the library. And if you talk about the another advantages, that robustness in the work and better utilization of library staff is another advantage, because when you have a enough staff to provide the services, your services robustness will increase automatically, and expensive tools and technique can also be actually purchased and shared through the centralized processing. That is one advantage, because some of the libraries, they do not have a budget to procure the expensive equipments, and therefore, if the things are being done at a central place, all these inhibits can be overcome. So, these are the things, these are the advantages of centralized processing, and I am sure you have learned all these things, but you also need to keep in mind there are certain limitation also of centralized processing. For instance, sometimes the cost of participating in central process may be higher for some libraries, because if the size of the library is very small and they are participating in a centralized process, which actually is more expensive than doing the work at their own library. So, that is one thing, that cost of participating in central process may be higher for some libraries. And another limitation is that participating in central process may not make much difference for some libraries, because their size of resources and clienteles are actually very limited. So, instead of participating in a central process, if they will do that small amount of work there at their own library, that will be more actually economic for them. So, that is another limitation for of the centralized processes. Then we also need to understand that different practices in how operation may restrict in opting the central processing for some libraries. Compliance to local variations may be hindrance in for some libraries in opting the centralized process, because some libraries are very specialized in nature and they have following one practice in stages, and if they participate in a centralized process, their local variations, their local practices actually dilute, and that is one of the limitations of centralized processing and participating in the central processes. So, these are some of the limitations of centralized processing. Now, come to the point, main agenda of today's session is that centralized cataloging. What are its advantages? So, and what this concept is all about. So, centralized cataloging service which actually you provide at a central point to several libraries. It is done by a single library or other agency for use of number of libraries. In centralized cataloging, the primary requisite for any requisite is high degree of uniformity in participating libraries. That is a one concept that it is done by a single library or other agency for use of number of libraries. In centralized cataloging, the primary requisite for any library is that high degree of uniformity. So, if the library does not believe in uniformity, then it is become a challenge for a library who is participating in a centralized cataloging process. So, that you need to understand. Then participating library can reap benefit of centralized cataloging when uniformity is complete. So, that also should be clear to all of you, that if you do not believe, your library do not believe in uniformity, and if you are participating in centralized cataloging process, then lot of other issues may arise. Centralized cataloging may range from simple cataloging of document to ready card to be part of member library catalog. So, here you need to understand the cataloging, centralized cataloging, you not just prepare the card, but you also prepare a card in such a fashion that the participating library just take the card and insert in their own systems. So, what is not a centralized cataloging, that you also need to understand. So, according to Lucille and Morse says that centralization of cataloging with a single system of libraries such as that of a university having a central and many departmental libraries, or a city library system that encompasses the public library, its branches, and perhaps library in the school will not be considered. So, it means a libraries, a university library which has a departmental libraries, but when they are doing the cataloging at center place, or a city library which has a different branches and they are doing a processing at a center place. So, that is not considered as a centralized cataloging as per the Lucille and Morse. So, that is their opinion, that here in the centralized cataloging more than different libraries should be part of this process. So, that then only we can say that it is a centralized cataloging. But if there is only one library and its different branches are doing the processing at the central place, that we cannot claim that it is a centralized cataloging. In cooperative cataloging also, participating two or more libraries also need a central office to coordinate the work. Therefore, it should be noted that centralized cataloging is one that is done by a single library. So, I am sure now you have understood what is centralized cataloging and what is not centralized cataloging. So, what are the different aims, what are the objectives of centralized cataloging? So, first and foremost objective is duplication of cataloging work by different libraries may be avoided, but because if you look into the libraries system, different libraries procure lot of duplicate content. So, one library procure one similar title which the other libraries has also procured, and when they do the cataloging work, that is also actually duplicate in nature. So, different staff at different libraries actually make efforts to create the catalog, and so and that is what the aim of the centralized cataloging is, to avoid that duplications. So, that at a central place one library can prepare the card for other libraries as well. Now, come to the another aim, that is called economy may be achieved in doing in-house operations. So, when the one library will do this task at a central place, eventually the economy can be achieved. The task can be done with the minimal efforts, task can be done with the economy, not just saving the time, but also saving the manpower and other efforts. So, economy can be achieved. So, one of the objective of centralized cataloging is to achieve the economy. Okay. Now, the third objective is that uniformity of the highest level may be attained. So, when you are doing the centralized cataloging, the uniformity can be achieved. So, different library will have a similar kind of catalog, which eventually actually lead to create a union catalog, or providing a interlibrary loan services, or creating a actually a common system which the clients of different library can be benefited. So, that is another actually aim and objective is of centralized cataloging. Library can also focus on providing better services to its client, because when the cataloging is done at a central place, it is eventually actually sparing manpower, and that manpower which is spared can be utilized in other services. So, eventually it not just improve the quality of the services, using that staff you can provide a different services. So, number of services can be increased with the help of the staff which are spared from the cataloging work. So, these are the actually advantages. Centralized cataloging help also in avoiding duplication of cataloging work. Apart from that, cataloging costs may be minimized by the library, and uniformity and the highest level of standard may be achieved in the cataloging. So, there are sometime actually another problem is that we also face shortage of skilled manpower to do the cataloging. So, because sometimes we do not have funds to recruit the staff, sometimes we do not get the qualified staffs. To overcome all this problem, centralized processing can be very helpful for the libraries, and of course, better utilization of staff we have already discussed in different operational services, and we can also think about preparing the union catalog with this. So, these are some of the main aims and benefits. So, but it does not mean it does not have a limitations. So, centralized cataloging also have lots of limitations, and these limitations actually range from that some libraries may face hindrance in opting the centralized cataloging because of arranging of funds for it. So, they actually have to arrange funds to participate in a centralized process, and sometimes the local variations, one libraries have their own practice, they have their own local variation which they actually lose when they participate in the centralized cataloging process. So, these are another actually limitations. Sometimes smaller library may face delay in services because they have a small number of books, very limited number of books, and if they participate in a centralized process, actually it take more time to send the books to the, or to send the person to get the catalog cards, or to get the information of cataloging from a central place. So, these actually become more cumbersome for a small size library instead of if they will do the task at their own library. So, that is another advantages. So, sometimes small library does not benefit from this centralized cataloging process. Therefore, unnecessary production of card is another problem, because when you are participating in centralized process, some library does not need the card which are produced by the central agency. So, eventually or consequently that will actually wastage of the cards, because the libraries which are participating in it, they do not need those cards, extra cards, or because they do not have those title in their own collections. So, these are also some of the limitations actually of the centralized cataloging. So, now you come to the point of what are the different forms of centralized cataloging. For instance, there are card services, there are mark machine readable catalog code, there are information services, cataloging in source and cataloging in publications. So, prenatal cataloging which Ranganathan has suggested. So, these are some of the forms of centralized cataloging. Cataloging in source given up by Library of Congress in 1959 and was revised in July 1971. So, the entries was revived in 1971 and that entry were prepared from the galley proof and data returned to the publishers. Three products of cataloging publications are namely, first is record of cataloging publications, cataloging data on mark tape made available before the final cataloging. And the second product is Library of Congress card made available before the publication date, and the third product of cataloging publication is cataloging data printed in the book itself. So, these are the three products of cataloging publications. Cataloging publication program assist publishers and libraries. CIP acts for publishers the program as a bridge to the library book buying market. Further, for libraries, it is an alerting service enabling selectors to identify book of interest to the user community. Examples of CIP cards like in CIP cataloging publications are like IFLA has their own method, and they bibliographic section defines the work of CIPs as follows, that the National Bibliographic Agency determines the data element to be supplied for the programs and make a printed information. So, these are the steps actually given by the IFLA in their website, that they first is that it is a printed information sheet or a web form. Then the data is made available for completion by publisher together with current contact information for queries. And the third step IFLA had described that related to the CIP is that in advance of publications, publisher provide detailed information about forthcoming publications to the national bibliographic agencies. And then fourth step says that information is used for creating CIP record, that is a preliminary record, and that preliminary record is published in national bibliography. So, a copy of CIP record may be provided to the publishers who print it on the book in order to make it easier for libraries to catalog the book. And in some cases, the record is not printed, but the publisher print a declaration that CIP record is available on from the national bibliographic agencies. So, when the resource is received by the bibliographic agency, the preliminary record is updated to reflect the item in hand, and the final is the upgraded CIP record is published in the national bibliography. So, what happens exactly in CIP is that a central national bibliographic agency, that they create the data, the cataloging record. So, they either print the record in a book form or they create a centralized database. So, where the publisher actually pick the record of that CIP and then they print along with their books. So, that is a process, and that these are the steps which are defined by the bibliographic sections of the IFLA on their websites. So, exactly what is the we can say in that CIP is a kind of a centralized cataloging process, wherein the actual catalog main entry is printed in the book itself. So, you might have seen, you can see on the screen some of the examples of cataloging publication, where actually along with the book these catalog cards are printed. Here you not just find the main entry of the catalog card, but you will also find the popular classification scheme. So, book is also classified using the popular classification scheme. So, these are the example of cataloging publications. This is another example you can see on the screen, that Library of Congress cataloging publication data, and the details are given here. So, these are some of the examples of cataloging publication, that how the cataloging publication is helping libraries, and this is also kind of a one of the example of centralized cataloging. Okay. So, these are the actually ideas which are actually, most of these ideas originated in the Western world, and people have benefited from this centralized cataloging and various services which were started in the West. But Ranganathan, actually Dr. S.R. Ranganathan came with his own idea, and he says it is a prenatal cataloging. So, the idea was originated by Dr. S.R. Ranganathan and suggested cataloging classification of the book should be done actually before its release. So, that is Dr. Ranganathan state, and he has given this concept in name of prenatal cataloging. It was suggested by the Ranganathan that publisher are obliged to send copy to the depository library. Therefore, the National Library should prepare the master stencil of the catalog card before its release. Call number of the book may also be printed as per the popular scheme of classification. Ranganathan mentioned that by this way we can save around 79% of the cost. So, library can actually achieve economy using the prenatal cataloging. So, that is the actually idea propounded by the Ranganathan. So, now you come to the what is difference between the cooperative cataloging and the centralized cataloging. In central cataloging, central place or agency is actually responsible, wherein central cataloging happen, and actually it's no other library is actually participating in it. So, the central agency is responsible to do the cataloging work. However, in cooperative cataloging, the work done by the participating library. So, participating library share the work in cooperation and then they execute the work. Another distinction between these two concepts is that in centralized cataloging, the work is central, while while work is done by coordination in participating library in the cooperative cataloging. So, this is another distinction between the two, that central place work is done in the central cataloging, while the work is done in the coordination in the cooperative cataloging. In the centralized cataloging, work can be extended to libraries actually, like those are not cooperating, like those are not participating, you can extend that work in the centralized cataloging, because the other library can reap benefit out of it when they will start become part of the centralized cataloging process. However, in cooperative cataloging, services are not expected to go beyond the cooperating libraries. So, that is another distinction between these two concepts. Third and very important distinction is that libraries in centralized cataloging work have minimal technical service, while in cooperative cataloging individual libraries actually perform their own work. So, that is another distinction between two. Interestingly, the centralized cataloging can be a commercial service, however, that is not possible in cooperating library. In cooperative cataloging, the cataloging can be done without expense, delay in sending books. So, that is these are the major differences between the centralized cataloging and cooperative cataloging. So, the main actual difference is that in cooperative cataloging, the work is done in coordination of the participating library. However, that is not the case in centralized cataloging, because work is done at a central place. So, if you look into the various case studies, what are the different services started related to the centralized cataloging? In England, centralized cataloging service, namely Harrods Central Cataloging Bureau, which was started in 1949, and it was an active service until 1952. In this, publishers to supply all books before publication, and cards were to be available through annual subscription or for individual title. Another centralized cataloging service was started by H.W. Wilson Company and the Library of Congress, which offer the most comprehensive services related to this. So, these are some of the centralized cataloging services which were very popular in those days when this concept were actually invented. So, I am sure now you have learned and you can easily distinguish what is centralized processing, what is centralized cataloging, and what is the difference between centralized cataloging and the cooperative cataloging. So, but we need to understand that how we will reap the benefit of this concept in the current scenario, when the systems are automated, when the databases are actually being created at a central place. So, you need to be very careful while opting the integrated library management system, that whether your system is compliant to the tools and technology, so that you can reap benefit of the centralized cataloging. So, but still libraries even in the modern environment, the centralized cataloging process can be very beneficial, not just to avoid the duplication of work, but we can also achieve economy, we can also achieve the uniformity of our system, and we can also provide better services to our clientele, because when we can spare our staff from the in-house operation, for instance the cataloging work, that staff can be utilized in providing the better and robust services to the client, and it eventually help us in achieving the 5 laws of library and information science, that books are for use. Every reader should get her his document, every document in the library should get its reader, and we should provide a services by not just saving the time of the user, but also we should keep in mind their changing requirement. And to address the 5th law of library information science, the library is a growing organisms. So, all these laws can be achieved when we will provide the better services and robust services to our clientele, and centralized cataloging can play a very vital role in achieving these 5 laws of library information science. So, with this I thank you very much for your patient listening, and I am sure you will learn a lot from these sessions. So, thank you very much for your patient listening.